Hi, and welcome to another episode of Law Stories. I am Linda Thompson.
And I am Megan Talbot, and we are here talking with
John Williams. I'm a professor of law at Aberystwyth University, and we're going to talk about ageing.
Great. I suppose first of all, could you tell us a bit about the background and maybe why you're interested in this area?
Okay, my research is about how the law impacts on older people. It covers many areas: criminal justice, health, social care, discrimination, prisoners, pretty well anything. How did I become interested in it? Well, it's partly personal experience, I think. Obviously, I'm getting older, and legally I'm an older person. But also, I seem to remember when I was a kid, my grandmother had dementia, and she went into what was then a geriatric hospital. And whereas the people there were very kind, it always stuck with me that the regime was really rather harsh, and there wasn't a great deal of quality of life. And since then, I've developed an interest in how the law works or doesn't work for older people.
I suppose that is a recurring topic on the media too, isn't it, about how older people are cared for?
There is a lot of media attention, particularly around the provision of care homes, and we've seen some fairly horrendous examples of how older people might be abused by those who are supposed to care for them. Stafford, and here in Wales we had the Operation Jasmine, of course, down in South Wales, an horrendous story of abuse against older people.
So I have heard of Stafford. I have not heard of Operation Jasmine.
Operation Jasmine was a very tragic case. It was a series of care homes in South Wales that were owned by one person, and the lengthy police investigation discovered some horrendous cases of abuse and neglect. For example, people with bed sores that were through to the bone. People who were vomiting feces, that they were so constipated. A real tale of neglect, of willful neglect. And the very sad thing about Operation Jasmine, there were not any prosecutions of those who were responsible.
When did this happen?
This happened, it happened probably about 5 or 6 years ago. There was a lengthy inquiry into it. As I say, the end result was no prosecutions. There was, of course, a backtail to all of that, but one sense, as lawyers, one sense is that there was no sense of justice there. That somehow, if you imagine that, I think we were talking about 120 older people. If you imagine that was 120 children. How the public reaction, and quite rightly, the public reaction would have been different. It would have been on the front page of every national newspaper. We would be campaigning to ensure that that never happened again. People would be prosecuted, of course they would. People would be dismissed. But we don't seem to generate the same amount of anger that we do, quite rightly, for children. Harold Shipman, remember Harold Shipman, the doctor who killed, probably in the region of 300 of his older patients. Well, okay, it hit the newspapers, but I don't think it hit the newspapers in the same way, as I say, it would if it was 300 children. And it's quite right we should be angry about child abuse. But where does elder abuse fit into all of this?
And to what extent does the law support our changing needs as we age?
That's a difficult question, actually, isn't it? Perhaps the first thing to say is the law should not really... we don't need a law called elder law, because whatever your age, you should be entitled to the same rights as any other citizen. There are certain things that do directly affect older people, for example, what we used to call old age pensions. We know that older people will be disproportionately affected by the law on social care and health because more older people use it. So there isn't a discrete subject, I don't think, called elder law. the point is, how does the law work for older people? I guess one area where the law might directly work or not work for older people is around ageism and discrimination. We cannot discriminate against people on the ground of age, for example, in employment. But I think essentially we are a very ageist population. The way we talk about the problem of an aging population. Well, actually, I celebrate the fact that I have lived longer certainly lived longer than my father. And I think it is something that we should celebrate, and we shouldn't see it as a problem. But that kind of informs the attitude of the general public. And I go back to Stafford, Operation Jasmine, and perhaps to suggest that maybe we weren't as appalled by that as we would be if there were other groups of vulnerable people, such as children.
So, before going into, I suppose, the law specifically, what perceptions does our society in Britain have of ageing at the moment?
I suppose it's fairly easy to say we're an ageist society. In some respects, we are. We tend to patronise older people. We also tend to think that all older people are the same, that once you hit, I don't know, shall we say 60, you become an older person, and all older people are the same. So from 60 to maybe 110, 112. There was a lady last year who had a hip replacement operation at 112. So that's a 52-year age span. And all the people in there isn't another age span that is quite as long as that. And all those people are different. Some 90-year-olds are sprightly, some are not. Some 60-year-olds are sprightly, some are not. People have different problems, different challenges, poverty, yes, but some, particularly what we call the baby boomers, might be better off because they've benefited from buying houses, the good times, as we call it. It's not a homogenous group. It's a different group of people. I think society does tend to think of it as one group who all have identical needs, who are all vulnerable, and all need a bit of cotton wool, and actually also don't contribute to society. They do, in significant ways.
So does that lead to a problem in how people are treated, that perception that they do not contribute?
I think it is. I mean, one of the disturbing things that comes out of much media discussion nowadays is an attempt to set generation against generation. I think that's dangerous because older and younger people have much in common. For example, poverty, fuel poverty, poor housing, isolation, and so on. But yes, I think it does affect the way we treat older people and our perceptions of older people. There are a number of, I suppose, different stereotypical views of older people. One, they're all frail and vulnerable. Well, they're not. If you look at the media, you see many stories of 80, 90-year-olds doing quite spectacular sporting events. The other is that they're all scroungers, that it's a drain on the economy. In fact, older people do contribute to the economy. 1/3 of unpaid childcare is provided by, guess who? Grandparents. Now, that's an economic contribution because it means that the parents of those children can go out to work, and older people contribute to the third sector, big time. And they're major source of volunteers across a wide range, and the third sector is a huge part of our economy. Older people pay tax. Many older people continue to work. So the idea that it's all take is nonsensical. They contribute. Clearly, there may come a stage when they're unable to do so, and given that they've paid their dues to the inland revenue and the national insurance, then surely they're entitled to some care and some dignity if they're unwell.
And the perceptions, do you think they're reflected within the law?
I think they're reflected maybe in the application of the law. In a sense, I don't think you can say that criminal law or whatever is ageist, although age isn't included in the list of hate crimes. But I think it's probably in the application of the law. If I can give an example of the research that we're doing here in the department, the Choice Project. Domestic abuse, a dreadful problem, all generations. What we found is that up until the age of 60, victims of domestic abuse, be they male or female, had the benefit of a whole range of laws, civil law, criminal law, and although those are far from perfect, they were available, they were used. At the age of 60, it seems to change. If we go back to elder abuse, the number of prosecutions, for example, in cases of elder abuse is round about 2% of all referred cases. Not saying it should be 100% or anywhere near 100%, but 2% seems staggeringly low. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it seems appallingly low. And what tends to happen, certainly what we found in some of our earlier research, this is Alan Clark and Sarah Wydell, my colleagues, what we found was that for an older person, they tended to be pushed towards welfare services, social care. And that may be the right answer, but I can't believe it's the right answer in all cases. And our concern is that in cases of elder abuse, the law, it's there, but it isn't used for older people. Give another example of older prisoners. It's the fastest growing group in the prison population. And I have no problem in saying if you do the crime, you do the time, whatever your age. If the likes of Rolf Harris committed the offence, then they should go to prison. But the issue there is once in prison, what happens? And certainly some of the research coming out of prisons by the previous HM Inspector of Prisons suggests that no concessions are made to older people who may, for example, be incontinent, have physical disabilities, need intensive social care. The system doesn't adjust to meet their needs. As I say, do the crime, do the time, but it's how we look after. So I think in short, the answer to your question is yes, the law in one sense doesn't discriminate, but maybe in applying the law we can discriminate against older people.
And I suppose some of the perceptions and what perceptions police officers maybe have of what is abuse, what isn't abuse, could influence. Yeah.
I mean, I think it's interesting. We've done a lot of work with various police forces in Wales, and what I do sense, or we sense, is I think a growing awareness and commitment by the police to
That's good.
Respond appropriately to any case of domestic abuse, but also elder abuse. We're finding people in, for example, Dyfed Powys, the South Wales Police, who are really committed to getting it right. I think they feel some anger. The police, I mean, going back to Operation Jasmine, I think the police were absolutely incensed that after a long £10 million investigation and some appalling cases that nothing was done. That's extremely frustrating for the police to investigate it all, and then for the CPS or the DPP to say, no, nothing is going to be done.
So if the weaknesses in the enforcing the law aren't coming from the police, are they coming from the Crown Prosecution Service?
The CPS, Crown Prosecution Service, is an interesting body. I must admit it has excellent guidance on prosecuting crimes against older people, and it is deeply committed in the guidance and the procedures to prosecuting cases unless that would be against the best interests of the victim. And we know that in criminal proceedings, the victim can use special measures, screens, pre-recorded video interviews, and the like. It's difficult to get any kind of insight into why the CPS do not prosecute some cases of elder abuse. I think if they followed their guidance, we should really be seeing a higher rate of prosecution. So there may be a frustration on the part of the police and social workers that cases are prepared and no prosecutions are forthcoming. With the CPS, it's a two-pronged test as to whether they prosecute. First, is the evidence good enough, strong enough, a reasonable prospect of a conviction? And the second is it in the public interest? Now, one might speculate, and it is speculation, two things. One, that a kind of assumption is made that a 90-year-old is not going to make a good witness. Well, a 90-year-old may make a perfectly good witness. We had this discussion with children many years ago, and children can make very good witnesses. The second thing is whether the assumption is made that it's not in the public interest to put put this in quotations, a vulnerable older person through the criminal justice process. The criminal justice process isn't pleasant, but it may be one means of the older person getting closure and getting justice. It's not to say that, I made this point earlier, that we should be seeing 100% prosecutions, 50%, actually even 25%. The dynamics of elder abuse can be very, very complex. For example, if it's in the family, supposing you've got a situation where the grandchild goes to visit the grandparents twice a week. That's nice, yeah? Keeps contact. But the grandchild is also stealing £10 from his grandparents on every visit. Okay? Now, where does the criminal law fit into that? If the grandparents ring the police and say, take this guy away and either caution him or prosecute him, a number of things follow from that. One, obviously, the grandchild no longer visits. And despite the theft, it may be pleasant, it may be the only visitors they have. It could probably break up the family because the grandchild's parents will think, oh, not going round there. So, the consequences, and the grandparents don't want to see the grandson criminalised. And the grandson may, or the grandchild may have their own problems. They may be using the money to fund an addiction. So it's a complex area where you could say, well, prosecution could only make things worse. But we can't just accept the situation, because that's to deny them the protection of the law.
Yeah, and I'm sure a lot of people in that situation
wouldn't
want to even make that initial call.
No, you wouldn't. You wouldn't want to shop your grandchild.
Exactly.
And as I say, you may be getting something out of it, because very often these relationships are not 100% bad. They are in some cases, but they're not 100%. There's a lot of good in them. There's company, it's intergenerational, it keeps up the family unit, but they shouldn't have to pay 20 quid a week out of their meagre pension to for that. It may be they'd be prepared to give him a tenner a week, but and that, I think, is often the dilemma that we face in cases of elder abuse.
So, when we're talking about this sort of complexity, is this one of the things that sort of tend to be absent in discussions about aging and the law as it's applied as we age? And what else would you say would be absent from discussions about this?
Well, yes, I think there's a growing awareness that we do need some new ideas as to how we respond to elder abuse, and particularly in the family setting. Part of the project we're working on is to explore some of those ideas. The more general question, I think it's more difficult to answer. There are a range of different areas where one feels that maybe the law doesn't work that well for older people. For example, if you go into a care home, it is purely a contractual relationship. You have no security of tenure. So you can be in the care home, you can be there for 10 years. It's your home, yes? It's not care home. The clue is there. And then suddenly your needs become too complex, or you fall out with the management. You can be, evicted. So there's no security of tenure. Whereas security of tenure is something we take for granted in particularly in rented accommodation. In Australia, they do have a system of security. If you go into a care home, you have a right to live there for life, and the care home has to operate such as to ensure that it can cater from your needs from the day you go in to the day that you die.
That's fascinating.
No, that's good, because the our needs will change. It may be a person lives to 90, they don't have a day's illness, and they pass away in their sleep. That's lovely, yeah. That's given the inevitability of death, that's what we all aspire to. I think, of maybe 100. I don't know. But for some people, their needs get more complex. Their mobility is reduced. Incontinence is an issue as people get older, and of course dementia. That will affect probably 25% of people over the age of 85. Now, you need some pretty intensive care in that situation. The idea of moving somebody because they've got a diagnosis of dementia into even a different part of the same home can have really disastrous consequences. Much of the research points to the fact that if you move an older person, particularly who might be borderline capacity, if you move them, it hastens death. It's the disturbance and all the other things, and reorientating, and it can be quite harmful to their well-being. So the idea maybe of moving somebody out of the care home they've lived in for 10 years and putting them 25 miles away in a home that can deal with their nursing needs, it's pretty horrendous.
How is it that Australia are able to have that service and beyond?
I don't know. I mean, it's clearly a policy decision that they've taken, and the point is, and given that most of residential care is provided by the private sector, in Australia, that particular position has shaped the market, I suppose would be the term. Yes, okay, that's what we've got to provide. Whereas here, it's different, and it hasn't. We're not providing that kind of impetus for the market to respond with not from cradle to grave, but from coming into the home to the point of death, or indeed the point of leaving the home and going back home. That's always a possibility. But I mean, it's in Australia, that's what the market requires, and private providers will respond accordingly.
So that's when we talk about what is available in different markets and jurisdictions. It always interests me, especially with regards to elder care, particularly of people with dementia, because my grandmother has Alzheimer's disease. And I see these stories about various towns in other countries and how they deal with it, and they seem to have much better schemes at dealing with it than we do.
Yes, I mean, particularly in Northern Europe, if you look at villages will adopt an older person or an older community. Families will adopt, yes. The person goes and lives with them. There have been some interesting examples here in the UK. And we all know that finding, getting on into the housing market is very complex, that people do struggle, and particularly younger people. But there have been a number of experiments where younger people, students for example, have moved in with older people, and in return for the accommodation, it's company, it's not care, because the older person may be probably able to care for themselves, and you're not at risk in that sense. But it's a nice deal, yeah. There's company, there's accommodation, and some of the early signs or indicators of that is it works. You've got to be careful. You don't want to put the wrong person in, because that might lead to abuse. But it's a nice idea, and it's part of this involving older people in the community. One of the big things about older age is isolation, fear of crime, and sometimes that's a very unreal fear of crime. So I'm not going out after 6 because there are young lads with hoodies playing football. Well, yeah, young lads with hoodies do play football. It doesn't mean to say that they're going to mug you, but the perception, maybe prompted by the media, is that you're at risk because these kids will mug you.
And you're frail. That's what the perception
absolutely.
is.
Yeah, you're frail. Yeah. I mean, the wonderful example here, the road sign, yes, that indicates that there's a care home. Look at it. It's two people bent over sticks, helping each other, and really looking quite pathetic. And that's the image. Yeah. That's the image that we conjure up when we think of age. But isolation, yes, is a big problem, and if people stay in their home all day, what do? They have to heat it.
Yeah.
So you then get into fuel poverty. When you go out to work, you probably turn the heating off and you save money because you're not there all the time. But for the older person, even a simple 2-bar electric fire is going to eat away at the money. So turn it off. So not only are you isolated, you're cold.
And of course, if you're sitting in the house all day, you're not doing any exercise.
You're not doing exercise. No, you're not doing exercise. It's not good for you. So I think the more we can engage older people in the community, and a lot of that is intergenerational. We're also talking about things like dementia-friendly cities.
Yeah, I've heard of this.
Yeah, which is, if you have dementia, it's no good putting a sign up saying, the supermarket's this way. You've got to communicate in a different way, and design of cities is good. I noticed that one of the supermarkets has introduced, I forget, I think they call it Slow Shoppers Day or something, but it's a system whereby I think for 2 or 3 hours on a Tuesday, there are seats at the end of the aisles. Yeah, so you don't have to do the entire shop in one go. The signs are more friendly, and these are the sorts of things that we should be looking at. Design is an important part of it. The way we design our cities, the way we design our homes. Most homes, in many cases, if someone buys a home, it may well be they'll live there all their life. Is it what we call aging friendly? Can we adapt it? And it's not just older people. It's people may have accidents and become dependent on a wheelchair or something. So we just need to be a bit more imaginative, I think, in the way we design things to take account that, we're an aging population and good.
Yeah.
So when we talk about all these different problems, you've mentioned a lot of different solutions. There are some sort of social solutions, there are some design solutions, and I love the design solutions because I'm a bit of a design nerd. I started listening to a podcast about a year ago called 99% Invisible, and since then I've been very into design and how it can
design is crucial.
Yeah. But there's all these different solutions, and I think one of the questions is, because you've talked about how one of the big problems with the law is actually mainly enforcement rather than anything else. So I think one of the questions is, what role does the law play in improving these things, or is it a social and design issue?
Well, the extent to which the law can change society is a complex question, and I guess we've not got the time to go into that. Law can change behaviour, but I think if we're totally dependent on the law to improve things, then we're probably on a hiding to nothing. Law can make a difference. If we say that ageism in employment is unlawful, it means you can't be sacked because you're 66, and that's good, and that will change attitudes. But I think the big challenge is achieving social change, changing attitudes, growing awareness of the issues around aging, and it's maybe coming because people's parents are living longer. The chances are that many people in their 40s and 50s still have parents who are alive and aging, and they see the way their parents live. It may be perfectly okay, but it may there may be hardship being experienced by the parents. So maybe we become a little bit more aware through that. But we do need, I think, to just reflect on the fact we're aging. That's good. Means that all of us, chances are, will live long. Live longer. I think a baby born today is likely to live to 100. So let's get ready for it, and let's be positive about it. And that does mean engaging different age groups in the community, getting them to work together, to play together. So yes, we've got to change society's attitudes. The attitudes of the media, I think, is important. The way it portrays age, be it through news stories or be it through soap operas, dramas, whatever. A positive view of aging.
So when you talk about social change, I remember seeing stories where certain societies adopt law as almost a blunt instrument to enforce social change. I remember reading that Japan had introduced a measure that made it unlawful to not care for your parents.
Yeah, it did. You are correct. That's an interesting law. A number of problems with it. Because in this country, we do not, with some exceptions, but on the whole, we do not have a legal duty to care, say, for our parents. Nor do they have a duty to care for you, as we're all adults here. Now, the idea of a law saying that you must support your parents, how does that work? Supposing, as is often the case, the children have moved away. They work in another part of the country. Do they have to pop down every day and make sure that all is well, or do we mean something else? What happens if the children, and we're talking about adults here, of course, but the adult children can't afford to support the parent? What happens if the relationship between parent and child is not good? It has been abusive in the past, abused by the parents of the children. Do we say, well, now they're old and vulnerable, the children should step in? That might be a recipe for disaster all round. So it's a nice idea. But I don't think that it is the answer. I think it's much more a change of attitudes, cultures. We have a rather romantic view, don't we, of times gone by, where we all looked out for each other and families kept together, and they were the strong. And I think that's probably over-romanticized. I think the reality may have been a lot harsher, and in some cases families may have hidden some pretty bad stuff. But yes, okay, you might say that certainly my time as a child, there was maybe a better sense of community, but let's not over-exaggerate that. But it is about rebuilding or building maybe the idea of a community, and the idea that age is just a number, doesn't matter. Young and old can get on. There can be mutual respect. And, you know, we mustn't say it's all the problem of young kids looking and saying silly old fogies. It's also older people looking at youngsters and making assumptions about them. Yeah. You know, older people have to accept some of the responsibility for that, because for whatever reason, it may be the media, I don't know, there is a view of younger people, and we've got to get rid of that. As I said earlier on, across generations, many problems are shed, many hardships are shed, many challenges are shed about access to health, about housing, poverty, benefits, all these things. It doesn't just affect one group.
This has been very interesting, and
I've enjoyed it.
I'd love to ask more questions on all these topics.
I've enjoyed it. Good fun.
I find it super interesting. Unfortunately, we have a limited amount of time, but we have more questions, and there will therefore be a part 2.
Okay, no, I'm up for that.
So stay tuned. Thank you for listening. I have been Megan.
Yes, and thank you, John. And I've been Linda.
Pleasure. I've enjoyed it. I've been John.
Excellent. And you have been listening to Law Stories. Thank you very much. Feel free to leave us a review or subscribe to the podcast if you'd like to hear the thrilling part 2, or at least the interesting part 2. Thank you very much. Goodbye.